At first glance, Indonesia looks like a chain of isolated islands. But for most of human history, this was a very different world. Vast, green and fertile landscapes, areas that were perfect for human life. But when sea levels rose, these worlds didn't just flood, they vanished, leaving behind a question. What if Indonesia isn't a footnote in human history, but one of its greatest missing chapters? Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it. Lost civilizations are the stuff of legend, and more often than not, our search for them confirms exactly that. But Indonesia may be about to change this, because research suggests that human culture here could extend far deeper into the past than we've allowed for, testing the limits of how we define civilization itself. The story begins in 1919 when, while working in the Dutch East Indies, geologist Gerard Molengraaf noticed something strange whilst reviewing hydrographic surveys. The seafloor appeared etched with branching, meandering channels and riverbeds, the kind of features that could only have formed on dry land. But this didn't just reveal a handful of small islands in the Java Sea. Based on Molengraaf's work, and later confirmed by other geologists, what lay beneath the shallow waters wasn't an island at all. It was a continent-sized landmass, later called Sundaland. This lost terrain stretched across more than 1.8 million square kilometers, encompassing much of what is now maritime Southeast Asia. But what's interesting is that during the last glacial maximum, around 20 to 15,000 years ago, Sundaland didn't lay underwater. No, it was a rich, green and perfectly habitable land, completely exposed. It had a vast, fertile and interconnected landscape, all of which led geneticist Stephen Oppenheimer, in his book Eden in the East, to propose it could have supported advanced human communities. But as the planet warmed and the glaciers melted, sea levels began to rise around 18,000 years ago, eventually increasing by roughly 120 meters. By about 12,000 years ago, most of Sundaland had been submerged beneath the waters of the Java Sea, leaving only the islands we see today. This meant that if any sophisticated societies did exist here, they are now lost under the ocean. Now, some of you might be thinking, Mike, interesting speculation, but how could any of this be remotely relevant when conventional history puts the earliest civilizations at only 6,000 years ago? And if Sundaland is mostly underwater, how could we ever hope to find anything? Well, let me introduce you to Dr. Danny Hillman Natawajaya, an archaeologist and geologist who proposes a similar theory, that Indonesia, and especially Sundaland, could hold clues to some of the world's oldest and possibly lost civilizations. And there's one site in particular he thinks might prove it. This is Gunung Padang. Natawajaya believes that this archaeological site could actually be the location of the world's oldest pyramid-like structure, potentially dating back 27,000 years. His claim was formalized in a multi-year study published in 2023. By using geophysical scans, including ERT imaging, his team identified underground anomalies that they interpreted as hidden layers beneath the terraces. But it was the excavations which caused the real controversy. First, they encountered large basaltic andesite boulders buried beneath ancient soil layers. The study argues that these rounded stones are usually shaped and transported by rivers, and thus that finding them high on a hill suggests they were moved there intentionally rather than formed in place. They also tested soil samples from the buried layers, where carbon dating suggested phases of activity reaching as far back as 27,000 years, far earlier than conventional timelines for complex societies. The team concluded that this discovery challenges the idea that advanced human civilization only arose 6,000 years ago, by another 20 millennia. If true, this would be genuinely staggering and completely flip our understanding of human history. But as you can imagine, the study was met with serious pushback that may be to some extent warranted. Many critics argued the dates were unreliable, noting the samples came from soil with no supporting artifacts, and that older stones found there could have been naturally overlain by younger sediments through erosion. Whatever you think, these results were controversial enough for the paper to be retracted by the publishing journal, although this came to the outrage of Natawajaya and many others. Thus, questions of this site's authenticity are still very much up in the air. But that doesn't mean the site itself is meaningless. Even its critics accept that Gunung Padang is genuinely ancient, and that humans did modify it over long periods of time. What's disputed isn't whether people were there, but how those layers formed, and how far back that activity really goes. So skepticism is necessary. But when the work comes from a published scientist and is backed by real fieldwork and unusual findings, it shouldn't be casually thrown into the conspiracy junk bin either. And more importantly, Gunung Padang isn't alone. Across Indonesia, archaeologists have documented numerous prehistoric stone sites scattered across the landscape. Taken together, they raise a possibility that this region once supported complex, organized societies largely erased by time. One example is Chipari in West Java, the same region as Gunung Padang. Excavations at this site uncovered stone cist graves, box-like burial structures made from carefully fitted stone slabs, alongside stone tools and early metal artifacts. Based on these finds, researchers date Chipari to late prehistory, with estimates placing its use at over 2,000 years ago. The site points to a settled community with shared burial customs and long-term occupation. But Chipari is only one example. Elsewhere in West Java, sites such as Libaksi Bedug, Lembadura, Pasedura, Leuwinglang, and areas of South Banten also all preserve large stone constructions, arranged into step terraces, often built on elevated ground. Archaeological surveys identify these structures as prehistoric in origin, predating written history in Java. But what's striking is the reoccurrence of the same architectural form. Just like Gunung Padang, many of these sites use terraced stone platforms rather than single standing monuments. Researchers studying West Javanese archaeology have noted that these repeated designs likely reflect a shared megalithic tradition, not isolated or accidental constructions, but variations of the same underlying architectural idea. Beyond Java itself, the wider region also preserves evidence of complex stone building traditions. One of the most striking examples is Nan Madol, a vast ceremonial center built from massive basalt columns, arranged into artificial islets. Constructed without metal tools or wheeled transport, Nan Madol demonstrates that organized labor, architectural planning, and large-scale stone construction were achievable in island societies long before modern documentation. While culturally distinct from West Java, it reinforces a broader regional pattern. Complex, coordinated societies, capable of monumental construction emerging in environments where much of the archaeological record has since been lost to jungle growth, erosion, and time. Seen in this broader context, Gunung Padang starts to look less like a one-off anomaly, and more like the most prominent example of a much older and largely forgotten archaeological lineage. But it goes deeper. We have already seen evidence of ancient architecture, recurring forms, shared building ideas, and sites that don't look isolated at all. So what if Indonesia wasn't merely on the periphery of human history, but instead a hub of human activity and advancement, a place where the foundations of civilization itself could take shape, and not just during the last glacial maximum, but much deeper into prehistory? Is this possible, and if so, how could we prove it? Well, the answer may not lie in stone, but at sea, because sustained movement across these seas would imply not isolation, but connection, the kind you'd expect from a regional hub, not a forgotten backwater. We already know humans were present in this region extremely early. Java man, Homo erectus, lived on what was once the Sundaland landmass, when much of Southeast Asia was still connected by land. That part isn't controversial. What is harder to explain is what comes next. Beyond Sundaland's ancient shorelines lie islands that were never connected by land, even at the lowest sea levels. And yet, humans reached them anyway, again and again. Take Luzon in the Philippines. At the Kalinga site, archaeologists uncovered stone tools and butchered animal remains, dated to around 700,000 years ago. Reaching Luzon would have required crossing open water, even during the Ice Age, a journey well beyond accidental drift. Or Flores, another island where stone tools were found dating to 1 million years ago, again, only accessible by crossing miles of open sea. And most striking of all is Sulawesi. Anatomically modern humans reached the island over 50,000 years ago, leaving behind some of the oldest known cave art on Earth, vivid scenes painted deep inside limestone caves, on an island that could only ever be reached by sea. Yet a paper published in 2025 showed that some type of human reached this island up to 1.4 million years ago. Again, a feat only possible by crossing hundreds of kilometers of open water. It's mind-blowingly old and mind-blowingly sophisticated. Now, the traditional explanation is is that these crossings were accidents. But when it happens this often, across this many islands, over such immense stretches of time, a harder question emerges. At what point does accident start to look like behavior? Many researchers are beginning to question the traditional answer. In one study from the University of Tokyo, researchers tested whether early humans could have reached these islands by accident or design. Using virtual simulations, they concluded that deliberate seafaring was far more successful and more likely to have been the case. If that's true, it changes everything. If early inhabitants had the ability to plan, to navigate, and to cross oceans with purpose, it only strengthens the possibility that complex societies could have emerged here long before conventional history admits. So humans have been island hopping across this region for over 1 million years. And close to these islands were once vast fertile landscapes, permanently drowned as sea levels rose. Thus, if history was written here, much of it is now erased. But here's the big problem. It's not just rising sea levels. Even on land, gathering evidence in Indonesia is extremely hard. In the region Indonesia sits in, archaeologists run into what's known as the tropical bias, a problem that haunts nearly every investigation here. Warm, wet environments accelerate chemical and biological decomposition, meaning many archaeological materials simply don't survive for long. And not all advanced ancient societies relied on stone. Many would have used organic materials, wood, bamboo, plant fibers, materials that decay rapidly in tropical conditions. But we know they absolutely could have been used. In regions with more favorable preservation conditions, sites like Monte Verde in Chile have preserved wooden structures and evidence of housing dating back 15,000 years. In fact, we even have a wooden structure dating back 476,000 years at Kalambo Falls in Zambia. Humans have had this capability for a long time, and thus it's entirely possible that humans have been living, building, and organizing complex societies in Indonesia for a long time. It's just that preservation is a major obstacle in this region. If humans really were developing at an advanced rate here even in earlier periods, say the late Pleistocene, we would have almost no way of knowing. And on top of this, there's another huge reason why history here may have been erased. That's because one of the biggest natural disasters in all of human history happened right here. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supereruption on the island of Sumatra released an estimated 5,000 cubic kilometers of volcanic material into the atmosphere. The resulting ashfall blanketed vast areas of Southeast Asia, with traces detected as far away as the Indian subcontinent. Events like this create massive ecological disruption. Entire forests were buried, rivers choked with ash and sediment, and any traces of human habitation would have been covered or obliterated. In other words, not only does this tropical climate work against preservation, but catastrophic sedimentation would have erased almost all evidence left behind by early humans. It may seem like these forces, climate, decay, catastrophe, prevent us from drawing any conclusions about Indonesia's deep past. But just because there are powerful factors preventing us from uncovering that evidence does not mean it never existed. In fact, this teaches us something more important than the discovery of any single lost civilization. It exposes a weakness in how we define civilization itself. Our models are built around stone, permanent, and dry environments, places where evidence survives. But in regions shaped by rising seas, volcanic destruction, and deep time, civilization would leave a far lighter footprint. Entire ways of living could vanish without leaving the kind of traces we're trained to look for. It's these very forces that obscure its past, which force us to reconsider how prominent ancient human civilization really is. But despite all of this, Indonesia remains by no means a dead end. It's actually one of the most underexplored regions in the world, and Sundaland, the lost continent that once lay here, now sits just beneath the waves, almost entirely unsurveyed. Sites like Gunung Padang and Nan Madol force us to confront the possibility that human culture here may have been far more sophisticated and far older than we thought. And the absence of evidence tells us almost nothing because of this region's unique power to erase. It's an archaeological story that has barely begun to be uncovered. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing to my channel down below. I'll see you next time.